Guys, thank you for that carrier update to kick off our second hour. Right now, we're going to welcome Blythe Brumley with us today, talking about how to build an effective conference strategy. And this is for times when you're not just hanging out watching a 6-hour virtual conference. So, Blythe, thank you for joining us this morning. And I think this is a really great topic because, I myself am even still just I go to a conference, I want to be everywhere in every session, talking to as many people as possible, right? But that's not necessarily effective.
Right. And welcome in, guys. Thanks for having me on this week. Happy to be back. And with conferences in particular, I've been taking a little bit of that time off over the last month because I did a bunch of pre-recorded interviews and things like that. So knowing everything that I've learned over sort of the January to now conference schedule, I'm starting to map out some tips for the fall season and going into next year and trying to find those little ways of improvements. And one of the ways that really helped me was looking at, and it sounds super simple, but looking at the event and the agenda and the speaker pages, because you want to be able to book those meetings in advance while you're at the conference. I'm sure everybody knows that you're being pulled in a million different directions. And so what really helped for me is to be able to establish those meeting points with people prior to the conference, kind of scout out who's speaking at the event, what kind of companies are going to be attending, and then reaching out to those people on social media prior to the event, making sort of a light introduction, and then trying to set up meetings and interviews with those folks on site, because trying to do all of those things while you're actually there is kind of impossible. It's a really sort of low success rate. I've tried it both, trying to secure them while they're live at the event and then prior to the event. And I had a much better success rate at booking meetings and booking interviews with folks beforehand. And so I think that tip could really come in handy for a lot of folks that's out there that are looking to not only attend, different conferences, but which conference to attend and why. Is your target market going to be there? Is your audience going to be there? Is there going to be lots of networking opportunities? Because like you said, the sessions, tend to be great at really all events, but it's the meetings and the conversations that you have at the lunch table or in the hallways. Those are the really impactful things that affect you much more after the show is over.
And Blythe, I love this topic. Any thoughts around when a good time is to kick off the first event for a conference? If it's early in the morning, or maybe give people a little bit of grace to get started and get the routines out the way, and how packed to fill up a schedule with speakers. And like you said, it's a huge networking opportunity. Do you just fill it up to the brim with, back-to-back, segments that you can really kind of sit in on, or do you give people a little bit of breathing room to have that networking opportunity?
So there's two ways that I like to tackle this. And one of the first ones is I love the conferences on the West Coast because they tend to start a little bit later. And I'm sort of a night owl. I like to work at late in the night. So I'm not really the earliest of risers. The earliest I wake up each week is actually for this show. So that I'm kind of a little bit of on my own when it comes to that. So the East Coast conferences, that's where I get into a little bit more trouble, where it's tougher to wake up for some of those 7 a.m. breakfasts and things like that. And I know that's sort of first world problems, but I tend to like the later start to the day because I can sort of ease into the day. It's a lot of peopling. It's a lot of talking to a lot of people, and you have to sort of acclimate yourself to that. Most of us, we've been used to working from home for the past couple of years. And so the idea of talking to people for a couple of hours each week is one thing, but talking to people all day, every day, for sometimes 3, 4, 5 days in a row, that can be really challenging. So me personally, I like to ease into the day, get some work done, get some emails done, and then hit the conference at 10 a.m. because you feel so accomplished. And a lot of the times with the West Coast conferences, they don't typically start until about 11 a.m. West Coast time. So it's perfect. So I tend to do that. And then I utilize the app religiously. A lot of times these conferences have the schedule and the agenda built right into the app. FreightWaves, of course, is one of them. And you can download the app. You can add your meeting requests in there. You can add all of the events that you want to see. And it's also really great for after the fact, because a lot of times you pull to different directions. You don't make the talks that you want to make. And so you'll have to watch them on replay, but it keeps a good sort of repository of the content that you wanted to check out. But then you can only check it out after the event is over because you were so busy peopling.
One of those busy peopling moments comes in the passage of business cards and kind of the exchange of business cards, almost like they're trading cards, right? It's like a badge of honor. Like the more business cards you collect during a conference, like, the better that you did. But something that I've learned is a lot of folks don't necessarily like having that bulk that business cards bring. So you've got folks that are transitioning to different ways of connecting with people. Like me personally, I put my LinkedIn QR code on my cell phone because my cell phone's like glued to my hand during a conference, and all folks have to do is just scan it with their camera and boom, we connect on LinkedIn. You have this really cool technique that you use with these little tokens, which I think are so brilliant. And can we talk a little bit about those strategies, different ways of connection that are, one, maybe make you stand out a little bit more than a business card does, and two, are maybe a little bit easier accessible than having stacks on stacks of business cards?
Yeah, I 100% agree with the business card angle. Kaylee, you mentioned a great tip on putting the actual QR code as your screensaver on your phone. So it's super easy to make those connections. But with other people, they just tend to, they either bring their business card or they don't bring any business cards, which I thought was a little interesting in sort of the, I guess, quote unquote, post-COVID lockdown situation that we find ourselves in. COVID is obviously still out there, but with the different precautions that people are taking, or maybe it's just excuses to not print business cards anymore, because the old way was printing the business cards, handing them out at any chance you get. And a lot of times you look at that stack of business cards after the conference is over, and if you didn't write anything on those cards about how you know that person or what you talked about, it's really, really challenging to remember all of those conversations that you had. So I suggest if you're going to take the business cards, just write a couple of little notes on the business card itself, so that way you kind of remember who you talked to and what you guys talked about. Another really good tip that I heard is that if you just get index cards printed, they're branded, you put your logo on them, and then that way you can write out, a couple little things and hand it to somebody. So you write out what you talked about or what you're going to follow up on, and then you hand that to the person, because then that's a little bit different of a size of a business card. It stands out a little bit more. One thing that I did notice, because I don't know if other folks saw these, but they are little like NFC tokens, and NFC tokens are like near field communication. They're the thing that if you ever tapped your phone to pay for something, then you know how near field communications work. Well, I made a ton of those and I brought those out to the Freightwaves conference, and people kept trying to take a picture of them like they were a QR code. So I got to work on a little bit of the design aspect for those things, maybe put like a tap me sticker on them or something, because a lot of people were really confused by those things. So that would be my biggest suggestion, is that if you're going to try something new like an NFC little token, or POG is kind of the look that I was going after, just make sure you do like a field test with them first, because too many times people were trying to take a picture of it instead of just tapping it with their phones. And so that was a really good lesson to learn the hard way after I made about 2,000 of these little token things and nobody knew how to use them.
So staying on that business card thing, something that I like to do when I go to conferences is that you'll get a stack of business cards and they go like straight in my little conference badge, or they go straight in my backpack. And then when you get back from your conference, you go and you head on LinkedIn and you search the person's name, you match it with their company, and then you send them a connection and you send them a little secondary handshake, is what I like to call it, right? As you reach out them, you say, it was so great to connect with you at such and such conference. I love that we talked about this. Let's make sure that we continue this relationship into the future. And the value of that secondary handshake is something that I think is really, really underrated, right? Because people will really remember if you are the first one to reach out in your connection. Can you talk a little bit about that? Do you think that it's better to do that through LinkedIn, through email, through a social media follow, or any of the above ways?
So I would do all of the above. I actually like to do it beforehand with some, but a lot of the conversations that you're having, you can't possibly anticipate those before the actual conference. So it's kind of like a developing, and this is another lesson that I learned the hard way, is you need to have certain expectations of yourself of what you're doing before, during, and after the conference. There were too many times that I got home from conferences and I'm just exhausted, but then I don't make any connections with those people. I don't follow up with them until about a week later, because I'm trying to catch up on emails and trying to do all the other things that I missed out on while I was away. And then before, if you wait too long, then you've missed that connection opportunity. So also going into a conference with the plan of what you're going to do, what kind of marketing campaigns are you going to run? What kind of social outreach campaigns are you going to run before, during, and after? Are you going to have a QR code as a screensaver on your phone? Are you going to follow up with that person whenever you get back into the office? How quickly are you going to follow up with that person? Are you going to send an email marketing campaign out to everybody that you met and add them to an email list. You need to factor in all of those things besides just getting home and trying to play catch up on all of your different emails, because that was one thing that really affected me, was not having, I had a strategy for before the event and kind of during the event, but after the event, I feel like would have had much more of an impact if I would have had some kind of a marketing strategy ready to go. And I know that other companies did a great job at doing that. And that's kind of where I got the inspiration for, is that I should have had, some kind of like, hey, this is, a TLDR on who I am and what I do, and this is what my company does. And having that already ready to go out immediately when you get back just helps you keep and stay on top of mind with a lot of the folks that you just solidified that relationship with. So that was another really good strategy that I'm going to implement in the future.
And Blythe, as a conference expert, what tips or strategies do you have for really being able to sniff out if a conference is going to be a flop or if there's just going to be a ton of people there? Because it's a huge investment for a lot of individuals. You're taking time away from work, you're traveling potentially long distances. What are some tips that you can kind of, give out to say, hey, this is some things to kind of look for? Because, of course, everyone that's putting on a conference is going to say, hey, this is the best thing ever. There's going to be so many people here. How can you kind of see through that and really kind of get down to what it's going to be?
So for me, it's kind of a multi-pronged approach. So there are the big conferences that I love to see, sort of the trade show floor and see all the different demo companies and things like that. That is one type of conference, and I thoroughly enjoy those. But with those, you have to really sort of check out the event page. A lot of times, 6-8 months in advance, you will see the agenda sort of already mapped out. You'll see who's going to be speaking there. You're going to see the sponsors. The sponsors can kind of give a hint on how big this show will actually be. And then, so you're going into it with a different approach versus a smaller sort of boutique style, or the networking is at play. And so there's two different strategies of how you kind of want to attack it. There are some warning signs, I would say, with certain conferences, especially if they're asking you to speak, certain things that, they'll ask you to pay to speak. And it's like, well, that's kind of actually a sponsorship. That's not really, are you paying for the expertise, or are you offering the expertise, or are you offering for a sponsorship package, which I've been caught in a couple different times. So you kind of have to really do your due diligence and look these people up, look up their company, see if they are ingrained in the industry, or if this is just sort of a fly-by-night thing where maybe they have, 6 different industry verticals for one big events company. And so that's where you kind of have to do a little bit of a deeper dive into, is this going to be worth my time? Because like you said, you are going to be away from work for days on end. You might be able to, handle some emails while you're actually at the event, but don't count on getting any real deep work done while you're at a conference. It's really going to take, sort of that week whenever you get back, or that week after you get back, until you get fully acclimated back into, sort of the regular work day. But it really takes research on your end to figure out if that's going to be worth the time and the money investment, because a lot of these conferences are not cheap. So who's going to be there? Who's sponsoring the event? What companies are going to be in attendance? Because a lot of times the companies that are going might not necessarily be a sponsor. So a lot of times companies will have that listed out on who's going to be there, and you can kind of infer as to the quality of the programming, even if they don't have the agenda listed out yet. I tend to look more towards the sponsors and the companies that are going to be there in order to make that final judgment call. But whether it's a small event or a larger event, I kind of have that same approach with each of them.
I think you've got to look historically too at what people said after this conference from the last year's approach, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I thank you for joining us this morning. We'll catch you on Cyberly tomorrow afternoon right here on FreightWaves TV. Right now, we're going to head over to Sydney Edwards. She's got our next check of the headlines for you this